approaching a sign that says Waveland State Historic Site. A view of some of the campus, including large trees and part of a parking lot. The front of a large rectangular building with Roman columns. Approaching the front door. Ascending the front steps. Gina Quaid with an introduction.
Hello KSB friends. Today we will be visiting Waveland Mansion in Lexington, Kentucky. Our guide, Susan, will be taking us on a virtual tour of this beautiful old home place. You should have received a package with numbered Ziploc bags and a map to Waveland. The bags are numbered 1 through 11. As we go through the tour, I will announce the number of the bag you will need for each part of the tour. You will want to take out that bag and explore the item in it as the tour guide tells about that part of the tour. You may also want to use your map as we move from building to building during the tour. We will be starting at the mansion labeled MN on the Braille map and Mansion on the print map. To orient to your Braille map, place the Braille map key at the top and then find a long line at the bottom of the map that symbolizes the road leading past Waveland. Going from right to left up the road, you will find another road that leads to the parking lot. Don't go that way, but find the next road that is shaped in a curved half circle. At the top of that line is the mansion. After you have found your way to the mansion, take out bag number 1, containing a white handkerchief, and let's knock on the mansion door and let Susan lead us into our tour of this beautiful place.
Greetings and welcome to Waveland State Historic Site. This was once home of Joseph and Margaret Bryan. He was a plantation owner, and at one time this plantation was almost 5 square miles. It's 2,500 acres. So come on in, let me show you this beautiful house. This is the family parlor. We call it that because all of the Bryan family portraits are around the room. Let me introduce you to our family. This is Joseph Bryan. He built the mansion between 1844 and 1848. His wife Margaret Cartmel Bryan. They moved in here Christmas of 1848 with two of their children. Joseph Henry was the youngest son, and Mary Ann was a daughter. Now, Joseph Henry was a very wealthy plantation owner. He not only grew hemp, the cash crop of the day, but he grew corn and oats and wheat, and he had livestock like cows and dairy cattle, beef cattle, hogs, and sheep. Let me introduce you to his father. His father was Daniel Bryan, and Daniel Bryan's mother was Mary Boone Bryan, and his father was Captain William Bryan. Now, Mary Boone was the sister of our famous frontiersman, Daniel Boone, and the Boone and the Bryan families were very friendly. In fact, there was about 5 marriages between the Boones and the Bryans. Now, Captain William Bryan built the biggest fort in Kentucky in the 1770s, and in 1778, he and his brothers and Daniel Boone and their sons made the trek from North Carolina to Kentucky. It took them a month. They went through the Cumberland Gap and up the Wilderness Road and settled at Bryan Station in northern Fayette County. Now, that winter in 1780 was harsh, a lot of snow, very cold, and the men had to go farther and farther out from the fort to hunt. And one day, Captain William Bryan and his hunting party were ambushed by Indians. Captain Bryan lost his life, and Mary, his wife, also lost 3 sons to the Kentucky wilderness. So what did she want to do? She wanted to go home to North Carolina. Daniel, her son, took her home. He was gone from Kentucky 6 years. He met his wife, Elizabeth Turner, and in 1786 made their way back to Kentucky. Now, he built a stone house that was once inside the footprint of this big mansion. In 1844, he was an elderly man. His wife had died. His children had grown and gone. And he said to his youngest son, Joseph, "Tear down my stone house and build a mansion befitting the family wealth and prestige." And so he did. And you see Waveland Mansion here. Now, there's lots of artifacts in this home. Some of them did belong to the Bryans. This big mirror on the mantle is a pier mirror used to reflect light in a room. It's got a beautiful Egyptian motif at the top. The Bibles are Bryan family artifacts too. This piano was donated, and it is a piano that was made in Cincinnati in 1878. It's a square grand piano, very out of tune, I might add, but listen to it. Margaret did play the piano, and I can picture her at Christmas, maybe playing some Christmas carols for the family. Many years ago, women used to carry handkerchiefs all the time. Today, we get a box of Kleenex. But back in Victorian times, handkerchiefs were kept close at hand, and here's a little Victorian handkerchief clip that I keep my handkerchief on. Now, Queen Victoria developed a special language using the handkerchief. It was secret, and so her staff knew that if she dangled it like this, she'd want something. And it became used by Victorian women all over England. For example, women could not be very bold and go ask a man his name or anything like that, but she might drop a handkerchief down on the floor, and he, the man that she wanted to meet, would kindly pick it up and walk over to her and start talking. This meant, "I love you." So there were lots of different ways that you could secretly use to communicate something that you wanted to say. During the Civil War, their commodities were very scarce. So women made handkerchief dolls for their young daughters. Now, this is made out of a man's handkerchief. It has a head and 2 little arms. And little girls were allowed to bring these toys to church. And they could sit in the church pew and play very quietly. And if your handkerchief doll fell on the floor, it was easy for you to pick it up, and it made no noise when it landed on the floor. Let's go on upstairs. There are 2 bedrooms I'd like to show you, but first, there's a tall case clock on this landing. This tall case clock was once owned by Daniel Bryan. It's said that he had the clock in 1830. that the works were made in London and the case was made here in Lexington. Back then, these big clocks were called tall case. But after 1876 and a very popular song, all these tall case clocks became known as grandfather clocks. Let me sing that for you. My grandfather's clock was too tall for the shelf, so it stood 90 years on the floor. It was taller by half than the old man himself, but weighed not a penny, weighed more. It was bought on the morn of the day he was born, and was always his treasure and pride. But it stopped short, never to run again, when the old man died.
Take out bag number 2, which contains a pincushion that's shaped like a tomato.
Let's go into the master bedroom. Today, we have Joseph and Margaret's bed and armoire. This is a big teaster bed with a canopy, a 60-pound goose feather mattress. Now, this house was built to be cool in the summer. With 30 windows and 15 exterior doors, they could all be flung open and catch the beautiful breezes. But in the winter time, can you imagine how cold it was with only a fireplace to heat it? 13-foot 9-inch ceilings, and all the heat would rise. So when it was time to go to bed, Joseph's and Margaret's servants would put hot coals or stones in the bed warmer, and they would run it across the top of the bed sheets, getting that mattress and the covers warm. Then they would climb in and close the curtains, keeping the heat in the bed area. Over here we have a sewing machine that was made in 1860. Now, women were responsible for all the clothing and linens that were used by her family. It was a very time-consuming job. A good seamstress could sew by hand 30 stitches in a minute. But after the sewing machine was invented in about 1840, these machines could sew between 500 and 600 stitches in a minute. Now, there are two things different about this sewing machine, aside from the way it looks. But this machine sews from left to right, not front to back. And also, it's powered by your foot. This is called a treadle, and you would pump your foot to the floor and up, up, down, up, down. That would make the sewing machine needle bob up and down. Now, pin cushions date back in recorded history to about the 16th century, and they've been used in various forms ever since. Pins back then were rare commodities, hard to come by and very valuable. Initially, they were kept in small wooden cases or ivory cases or metal cases. Pin cushions are something where you could keep your pins close at hand. And here's a little sewing bird with a little pin cushion on top that women, when they were sewing by hand, could keep a few pins handy. In there. Here's a pin cushion that dates from about 1850. This is filled with sawdust. Your pin cushion that you have in your box is round. Feel the round tomato. Now, it is made inside, it's stuffed with cotton. And it's very handy to keep some pins in your pin cushion when you're sewing something by hand. Now, there's a little strawberry attached to it. The strawberry is filled with emery. And emery is a rough substance put on emery boards to file your nails, and that's what it does for a pen. It cleans your pen if you push it in and out. And so there you have your pen cushion. This is more than likely our oldest artifact that we have at Waveland State Historic Site. It's called the Squire Boone chair. It was made or purchased by Squire Boone before 1720. Squire was the father of Daniel Boone. This chair was attached to a pack horse, and on that chair rode a little girl, Rebecca Boone Grant. She rode to Kentucky in that chair. Now, it took over a month from North Carolina to Kentucky to travel through the Cumberland Gap and up the Wilderness Road. A long trip for a little girl, but at least she had a little car seat, right? It got passed down in the Lamont family. She married James Lamont, and it was a wedding present. And it came here in 1969 after the last owner of the chair willed it to Waveland. Rebecca was an excellent weaver, and she wove that coverlet on the arm of the chair. And there's a story that she wove some fine cloth, made a dress, and went with her uncle Daniel Boone to Washington for a visit. Our other historical chair here is the slipper chair. Now, this chair was used by Victorian women. It sat very low to the ground, and a woman would sit in that chair, and her personal servant would put her shoes on. Now, here's a pair of button-up shoes. You would have to pull the button through the buttonhole to get these all fastened. I like to talk about the period clothing that I wear when we give tours and teas at Waveland. And I've got a day dress with a day bodice, something that Margaret might have worn to go to church or the theater or to visit friends. Now, to dress in Victorian clothing, you have to wear Victorian underwear. And today I put on my chemise, which is like a cotton camisole, and a corset. Now, corsets go from the top of your hip to about midline of your bust. They're laced up the back, but they have metal stays in the front. So I keep my corset laced, and I pull it around me, and I tack the bottom metal hook and the top, and then I pull it closed. Then I tighten my own laces up. They run from the top to the middle. You pull it, tie it in the front, run from the bottom to the middle, pull it, tie it in the front. And there you've got your corset on. Underneath, I have a pair of flat shoes called slippers, perfect for church or a tea. I have a ribbon rosette on my toe called the shoe cockade, and Victorian women loved to embellish their hats or belts or shoes with cockades. I have a pair of Victorian socks on. They go up to my knee, and Victorians were really colorful people. I have a pair of drawers on. These are my underpants, and between my drawers and my hoop, I have a privacy slip. Now, this slip was worn so people couldn't look up your hoop when you're walking up the stairs. I have a 5-bone hoop on. Back in the 1850s, these hoop skirts were made out of whalebone, very flexible, or steel. Today, they're plastic. On top of my hoop, I have one petticoat, and then I have another petticoat. That's because Victorian women wore at least 2 petticoats on top of their hoop, so the bones of the hoop skirt wouldn't show through the fabric. On this side I have a reticule, and women would keep their calling cards, a little lip rouge, maybe some money in their reticules. And on this side I have a chatelaine. Now, a chatelaine is a pin or a hook worn at the waist and keeps things handy for you. I've got my sewing chatelaine on today. I've got a pin cushion, a pair of scissors, a needle hook, and a thimble. Okay. I'm wearing a Victorian brooch, dangle earrings, and a hair snood made out of ribbon. And women wore something in their hair at all times, whether it was a day cap like Margaret's downstairs, or a snood, or a hat, or a bonnet. Okay. Let's go on to the guest bedroom.
Take out baggie number 3, where you will find a cup and ball and a yo-yo.
Today we have interpreted this as a guest bedroom. If you were a guest at the Bryans for dinner, you would more than likely spend the night. It was 6 miles to Lexington City. So a guest bedroom had several beds to accommodate visitors. Here's a bed that has a trundle underneath it, and you could pull out this bed, and a little child could sleep there. Or at that time, if you had one in the 1850s, your personal slave would sleep there too. This is a cradle that was once owned by the family of Louis Bryan. Now, this was made in 1850, and Louis was Joseph's oldest brother. Waveland has quite a collection of toys, and here are some toys that wealthy children might have received in the 19th century. Parents could go to Lexington to buy toys in a shop, and especially after the Industrial Revolution, when toys could be made in factories. But let poorer children and children of the 17th and early 18th century did not have that luxury, and they made homemade toys. Now you have a couple of toys in your box. One of them is a cup and ball. This toy, made out of a round wooden circle and a stick, dates back to medieval times when young men were trained to be a knight, and they were on a horse. They would have a lance, which is a spear, and a circle would be dangling from a tree. And he would ride full tilt and try to put his lance through that circle. Retrace our steps back down and go into the best parlor or the formal parlor.
Take out baggie number 4, where you will find a cup and saucer and a bag of tea and a box with tea cakes or scones.
This is the formal parlor or the best parlor. We first met in the family parlor, and traditionally it's said that Joseph and Margaret went and relaxed in that parlor after dinner. This was reserved for special occasions like weddings or funerals, or Joseph entertained his business clients here. Margaret, it's traditionally said, served tea every Tuesday to her friends and her family. Now, according to legend, tea was first discovered around 3000 BC when a Chinese emperor stopped to rest by a roadside. His servants boiled water for hygienic purposes, and by chance some dried leaves fell into this boiling water. When the emperor tasted it, he found that the brew was interesting and refreshing. Centuries later, tea reached Europe, and it wasn't until the 1700s that it finally reached America. But Victorians brought tea to an art. To make tea, you need some boiling water, a teapot, and some tea leaves. Women would bag their own tea in little paper bags like this, and they would put several spoons of tea in this bag. Oh, doesn't that look interesting? Smells good too. Okay, so then you would open up your teapot and you would put your tea bag in there and pour your hot water in. Okay. Now, you would have to let the tea steep. That is, sit for 3 to 4 minutes while the hot water takes out the flavor of that tea. At Waveland, we do serve tea on Tuesdays, and we serve a lot of different things. We serve 4 savories, which include little sandwiches. We serve vanilla bean scones and lemon curd, and 4 seasonal desserts like a chocolate-covered strawberry or a lemon bar. So let's try this tea. It looks good. Like the Chinese emperor said, it's refreshing. That's good. Do you take sugar or milk or lemon with your tea? Or some people just drink it straight like this. Okay. We're going next to the plantation office.
Take out baggie number 5 with a quill feather.
Joseph Bryan spent the majority of his time in the plantation office. He visited with clients, he worked on his books, and this room is very unusual due to the fact that it has 7 doors. We've just come out of the formal parlor where he would entertain various business associates. We're about to go into the dining room where Joseph and his family and guests had their meals. We've got 2 exterior doors, one that leads out to the porch, and back in the 1850s there was a drive that people would drive up in their carriages and come and enter the house this way. We also have an outside door there that Joseph could open and talk to his overseer and tell him exactly what to do on the plantation that day. 2 closets, one small closet in underneath the steps, probably held a safe, and another closet over here probably held firearms. There's one more door that leads upstairs. This is an internal stairway that leads to 3 bedrooms across the top that today aren't open to the public. But back then, it was probably a bedroom for Joseph Henry, storage, and maybe some guest bedrooms too. So Joseph would sit at his desk and he would record all of his expenses, purchases, make out bills. And back in the 1800s, they did not have ballpoint pens or metal nibbed pens, but what they used were big feathers called quills. Now, the feathers were from a large bird's wing, and this is a goose feather quill. You might have a turkey feather quill or a seagull quill, large birds. So what you would do is make ink, and this ink is made out of charcoal, and you would dip your quill pen in your inkwell and kind of dab it, and then you would write. And you might have to refill your pen several times before you wrote what you wanted to. There, my pen's run out. Okay. And here, oh, too much ink. Didn't dab enough. There you go. All right, now here's an example of a ledger. There were no computers back then, and you had to keep all your records in a ledger book. This looks like a ledger book from a farm owner because there's several things that have to do with harvesting and animals and things like that. Here's a bridle at $2.50. A collar, a horse collar, at $5.50. Some harnesses at 65 cents. A whip at $20. Now it's time to go into the dining room.
Take out baggie number 6, where you will find some sugar cubes.
Welcome to the Bryan dining room. Actually, this dining room has something very special in it. The carpeting is beautiful. It's in vibrant colors of red and green and blue. This carpeting is actually a carpet that was reproduced from a piece of carpet found in the basement. Now, we know that this carpet that was found in the basement dates back from 1850. So whose carpet was this? It was Margaret's. This is period carpeting. It was made in 3-foot rolls. Laid down, another roll, matched and sewed together. All of the carpeting throughout the house is made in this. The Bryans took their meals here, and here is a table traditionally set with a dinner that the Bryan family might have eaten. We have some pork chops, we have a turkey, and traditionally there were 2 meats served at dinner. There's all kinds of other vegetables that the Bryans ate, like asparagus or okra, squash. Of course, they ate bread. There's some rice. And also at Christmas time, they went to Lexington and bought delicacies like tropical fruit, pineapples, and strawberries for treats. Something that the Bryans bought that was very expensive back in the 19th century was sugar. Now, sugar came all the way from South America or the West Indies. It was made from sugar cane or molasses, boiled down, and made into these solid cones. Here's a refined sugar cone and a brown sugar cone, unrefined, kind of like our white and brown sugar today. And it was wrapped in paper. Now, when Margaret bought her sugar, she would keep it in a sugar chest, a special piece of furniture, usually in the dining room, that she could put her sugar cones in there and take a key and lock it up, because sugar was very expensive back then. So when you had your sugar cone, it's like this. You would take your sugar nippers and you would break off a piece, just like that. Or you could take a hammer and really crack a piece off. Either way, but these are little sugar nippers that maybe sat on the table when they drank tea. Now, baking was a little harder. If you wanted to bake a cake, you needed granular sugar. So you would take your sugar cubes, your pieces of sugar, and you would pound them with your mortar and pestle. Okay? So you'd have to do this over and over again. So I've ground the sugar up, and now I can use it to bake a cake. There are so many interesting things to see outdoors at Waveland. And I'd like to take you to our formal gardens, which are in the back of the house.
Take out baggie number 7, and you will have some flowers and some herb seeds.
Now, Waveland State Historic Site has 2 beautiful formal gardens that are maintained by 2 different garden clubs. This first one is a native plant garden, and the other one over here, the walled garden, is also native plants, but they have a special purpose. They're monarch way stations, and that means that these ladies have planted flowers and plants that attract monarch butterflies, and they feed off of them. You know, our monarch populations have been decimated by traffic. Monarch butterflies fly to South America every year to spend the winter. And how many people have seen butterflies smashed on their window? Another thing that is unique about these gardens is they're also herb gardens. And back in the 18th, 19th century, when people didn't bathe very often, women would carry tussie-mussies around. Now, a tussie-mussie would be kept handy, and they could be put up to your nose if a smelly man came by and you wanted to just disguise that odor. Those are jonquils and violets. Smell so good.
Take out baggie number 8, and you will find a bar of soap.
Now we're going to stop at one of 5 of the Bryan slave quarters. This house was built at the same time the mansion was built. We know only the slaves that served the Bryans in the house lived here. We had 3 cooks, Priscilla, Ellen, and Martha, and we had a butler named Moses, and several children lived here. The rooms downstairs, the first one that we'll go into, was used as the kitchen. For no food was cooked in the mansion. It was all cooked in the kitchen here at the slave quarters. And that's because the Bryans did not want all the cooking odors and the smoke permeating their beautiful carpets and draperies. Another reason is that the fireplace here in the kitchen was 4 and 5 times bigger than the heating fireplaces in the mansion. So a fire going from morning till night, it would have kept the house too hot. So usually southern mansions did not have kitchens in their house. So let's go into the kitchen. We call it the slave kitchen because back in the 1850s, of course, the slaves did the cooking. And what we have here is a wonderful example of 17th and 18th century cooking gadgets. We have a hot water heater, sometimes called a boiler. You see the spigot down below. We have a hearth full of spiders, and that's not the 8-legged kind. These are pots and pans and griddles that have legs on them. And what that did was allow the cook to rake coals underneath the spiders to extend the cooking surface. We have a kick or toe toaster here, and you could put this close to the fire, put your 2 pieces of bread, and kick it around with your boot or your toe, and you wouldn't have to burn your hands. So that's a kick or a toe toaster. We have an oven for baking. You could pull it into the fire and you could bake a cake or biscuits in it. Or you could pull it out and it could just keep your biscuits warm. Here's a big crane with a bunch of kettles that could be You could make soup or roast. There's a chicken in one pot. There's corn dangling down, roasting over the fireplace. Now the Bryans slaughtered hogs every fall, between 25 to 80 hogs every year, and they put their meat up in the smokehouse. But they would use every single part of that hog. When the hog was butchered, what they would do is take all of the fat and put it in a big kettle and boil it down over the fire. Now this fat was used to make a lot of things. It was used to make soap. And here's some lye soap. You have lye soap in your packet. A big cake of soap was used for washing dishes, washing clothes, and washing your body.
Number 9, where you will find some hemp fibers and some hemp harps.
Please follow me up to the second floor of the slave quarters. This is where some of the Bryan slaves lived. So let's remember, when you're walking up these stairs, almost 200 years ago, enslaved African Americans were walking these stairs too. Today we have 2 fine exhibits at Waveland. The first one that we're going to talk about is our hemp exhibit. And the Bryans grew hemp. Any large plantation that produced hemp had to have enslaved labor. Now, it was very labor intensive. First, you had to get the soil ready, you had to sow the seeds, you had to cultivate it and weed it. Then you had to harvest it. Now, after the harvest, the hemp stalks, just like this one, were laid on the ground to rot. And this would rot off the green casing. And in the wintertime, the enslaved people would take shoulderful of hemp fibers and they would put it inside the hemp brake and they would rub it over and over and over again until they got all of the fibers free from the stalk. And this is hemp fiber as it looked back in the 1850s. It would have to be pulled through these hetchels and straighten the fibers out. And then this was sold as a commodity. Today, hemp has had a resurgence in Kentucky. Fibrous hemp plants are grown, and they can make, you can make bags and clothing and things like that. But most of the hemp grown in Kentucky is used for CBD oil and food things like chocolates. Also soap. This is portrayed as a dining area, a place for a little recreation, a slave that might be smoking his pipe and reading the Bible with his feet up on a foot warmer. We have a tradition that maybe Margaret taught some of her slaves to read. And we have an ironing area over here in the corner because we know that women's work was never done. So these are irons that are lined up by the fire. And to iron clothing, you would need several irons. Now, these irons are very heavy, from 10 to 15 pounds. So they would be heating up on a wood stove or by the fireplace. And to iron, you would pick up a hot one, and you would iron your clothing or what you needed to iron, for 3 or 4 minutes. That's when it cooled down. So what would you do? You would take your iron, you'd put it back near the fire, and you'd pick up another one. And you'd iron until that one cooled down. And then you'd pick another one up if you weren't done. So that's where our saying comes from. I've got a lot of irons in the fire, meaning she had a lot of laundry to iron. Sometimes these irons are called sad irons. It didn't mean that the ironer was depressed. Sad was a term for heavy back in the 1800s. Let's go on to the next room.
Take out baggie number 10, where you'll have 2 small bags with wool in it.
Now there's a misconception that pioneer women had to weave their own fabric for their clothing. That simply isn't true. Most looms used back then were so large, here's 2 pieces of a loom, and they would not fit in their small log cabin. But what they had to do is spin their own yarn or thread. And they would use a spinning wheel and spin their yarn, and they would collect it on a spindle. They had to measure it because the weaver would say, I need 10 skeins of red, I need 5 skeins of white, I need 5 skeins of blue. So what the pioneer woman had to do is measure her yarn or her thread. She would put it on this thread winder, sometimes called a weasel, and she would tie it and then turn it around, and after 40 turns, this weasel would pop. And that's where our song comes from. Pop goes the weasel. A lot of times I ask, do you have any questions? But maybe someday you can come to Waveland and take a tour. We'd be happy to show it to you. We have one more thing to see though, and that's the Smokehouse.
If you are following along on your map, we left the mansion and came straight out to your right to the garden. Beside the garden is the slave quarters, and we're going to travel next to the Smokehouse, which is directly behind the mansion. Take out baggie number 11, where you'll find some beef jerky.
Once the hog was butchered, the big shanks, the leg portions that make the ham, were put into these canvas bags, and then they would bury it in the salt trough. It stayed in the salt trough for about a couple of months, leaching out all the moisture, and then it was hung in the rafters, and a smoky fire was built underneath, and the meat was smoked for many months. Now, after the fat was boiled down and it was liquid, they would take one of these strainers and they would strain off the hog skin, and they would put it in this press. It's called a crackling press. So you would take the skin and you would put it in here, and there was a mesh piece down below, and you would squish all the liquid into the crock. Now that skin has been known as cracklin', and so we eat pig skin today. I think you have a piece of beef jerky in your box, which would be a lot like some of the different kinds of meat that the Bryans made in the smokehouse.
That concludes our tour of Waveland in Lexington, Kentucky. Maybe you and your family will get a chance to visit someday.
And come on and ring the bell for dinner.